on the low end of the market where we see deals, $1 million to $5 million, our overall EBITDA multiple rarely exceeds 5 or 6. I mean, we just don't see numbers get that high up into a 9, 10, 12x multiple, right? As you go up that scale, you'll see that you can call it desperation or even just availability of goods and businesses in the market. There are other private equity companies who will offer a higher multiple for you as well. And so the deal value though can change, or the multiple can change, vastly. I have a client of mine, their competitor just raised $250 million, promising up to a 22x multiple.
Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman.
Well, welcome back to How to Buy and Sell a Business Successfully with Sam Foreman and myself, Jacob Wayman. I think we're on episode 25, 26. I mean, we were thinking about how many we've done so far.
It feels like so many more.
Well, when you're with Sam Foreman, it feels like forever.
Thanks.
That was bad. Sorry about that. But my name's Jake Wayman. My wife and I are the Orange Theory Fitness franchisees here in the Wichita market, and I'm also a fractional business development executive for my firm, Wayman Consulting Group. And I'm joined by my amazing co-host, who I love dearly, Sam Foreman.
Hey, I love you too, man. Yeah, I'm Sam Foreman. I'm a M&A attorney, do business law as well. Love working with folks buying and selling businesses. Best part of my life right now is getting to spend time with my two kids. Our oldest is starting baseball. And so for any parents or grandparents listening out there where your calendar just starts to get consumed by all of the sporting activities, I'm getting a little bit of a taste of that. It's so fun. Really enjoying this season of my life.
I always forget to talk about my kids every single episode.
The only time Jacob forgets to talk about his kids is on this podcast. He's very proud of his kids. He's a great dad. He's a great husband, in addition to being a great entrepreneur and a great leader. We're really excited to be joined by Matt Agnew today to talk about some private equity themes, and Matt's got a lot of experience in that world as an attorney. He's his career is one that's just really excelled at a really high level. His last firm that you were at was an AM20 firm, which for those who aren't immersed in the legal industry terminology, that's one of the 20 largest firms in the country. Where he his practice focused on M&A and healthcare law, and did that at an exceptionally high level. Matt is a big advocate for community impact. He's here in Wichita, which we're really, really grateful to have him as part of the Wichita and the Kansas community, and has started his own practice, Agnew Health Law. Agnew Law. What's the working title today, Matt? I'm a bad friend.
It's agnewhealthlaw.com. Yeah, you couldn't get the easy parlay into the easy URL. So.
Yeah, I'm at goforemanlaw.com. So, yeah.
Mine's easy. WaymanConsultingGroup.com.
Yeah. I love it. But Matt, we're just grateful to have you here. Excited for you on this journey as you're kind of starting your own firm and really working to bring really world-class level healthcare services and M&A services to clients here in Wichita and really across Kansas. Matt's a great dad, great husband, and man, just a really cool dude. Thanks for joining us today. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Well, shout out to Isla, my 4-year-old, got that out of the way.
Yeah.
So I'm a 10-year plus attorney. I went to the University of Kansas and started my practice in Texas. Been in healthcare most of my career, but M&A focused for the last probably 5, with a heavy focus there on both M&A and regulatory advising. And so it's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed kind of working for sort of the big national law firms, but when your rate's $1,000 an hour, you got to put that behind you at some point. And start charging more realistic ones. So.
Yeah. I aspire to those levels to create that kind of value someday.
I won't be a client of yours anymore. Same if we're at that level.
Oh, that's great. No, that would be terrible. Like, don't leave me, Jacob. You'll have a grandfathered into. Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, 800 now.
Yeah.
For anyone who's thinking about hiring me, I do not charge $1,000 an hour. But that is how much value I create per hour. Oh goodness. Well, Matt, a lot of folks that are listening, that are building really significant businesses are thinking about, hey, what might that exit look like for me? I've built up this business. I'm, maybe I'm nearing retirement, or maybe I just think it's a good time in the market, and a buyer that they might be looking at might be a private equity buyer. And a lot of folks, if they're selling to private equity, it might be the first time that they're selling to private equity, and they don't have any idea what to expect. Let's talk about like what kind of businesses private equity starts to look at, because of course they're across all different kinds of industries, but what size of businesses, what level of development, how do you might have something if you're on the sell side? How do you might have something that a private equity buyer might be interested in the first place?
Yeah. So private equity is largely interested in anchors and tag-alongs. So they're looking for a business to anchor them, and then they're looking for businesses that they can sort of tie onto that anchor to continue to make that anchor profitable. So, being an anchor business is rare. Like, you've got to have large presence, usually multi-states. It's not, most of our anchors start at about $40 million. I mean, it's a very large purchase. And the thought process from private equity is kind of very simple. Private equity has absolutely zero industry experience. So when they come into a new space, they've got to grab the industry experience, the executive leadership teams, the policies and procedures, the way you do it right in that industry, and they look to somebody else who's already doing it right. The other key focus of then is what can they strap onto that vehicle, to make it more profitable, to make it work right, or to be more streamlined with sort of their growth objectives. And so the other is just, how do you become a tag along? You basically operate your business cleanly and profitably. And it's those sort of things that, if they've got themselves an anchor, being able to join onto that anchor is a lot easier once they have sort of a solid platform.
Yeah. If somebody's wondering well, from a valuation perspective, is it usually more valuable to be an anchor as a seller or a tag along, or does it just kind of depend on, how well your business is doing? I mean, for those who are listening, the lawyer answer is always it depends, obviously. But
yeah, I mean, it definitely depends. But I would say, you want to be the anchor if you can be the anchor. You're going to have control of the entire system usually, because as the anchor, they're going to grab your executive team. They're going to look to you to lead. They're going to look to you to be doing sort of the financial analysis and be providing sort of the overall summary and conclusions about the way you're running the business that the private equity group is acquired to the private equity team. Private equity teams, unless they're well resourced or very well focused in on a particular area, they almost always just don't have the industry experience necessary to take over operations. And that that wasn't always true, but the last 5 years, and particularly the last 2 to 3 years, we don't do many deals anymore in the private equity space that doesn't come with leadership.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful.
Well, then when you're talking about the tag along part of it, and you're saying when they do the tag along, is that more just because they need maybe some IP that the tag along has, not necessarily the people side of it, or is it when you're looking at it, because you're saying the anchors they're trying to get leadership, they're getting processes, standard operating procedures, but when you get the tag alongs, is that just more, hey, we just need this piece of the puzzle to put into it, and then not necessarily the team doesn't come along with it?
I've seen it done both ways.
Okay.
So sometimes they need specialty IP. Like we have some groups that, for example, there's DSOs. DSOs, I think most people in the dental space kind of know that the dental medical records are pretty bad. Like no one's done a really great job of putting forth a solid medical record system. And so a lot of these groups will go out and they'll anchor themselves and then realize, I don't really want to operate under this sort of poor operating system. So they'll go out and get the tech piece, but they may just need the tech piece. They may not need anything else associated with that tech piece.
Yep.
Alternatively, they may need operation locations. If they're a dental location, a DSO, when they purchase an anchor, they may purchase, say, 10, 15 locations and a centralized hub, but they want to stack on more locations to add both profitability and sort of the baseline numbers at the very bottom to show that they're doing what they're supposed to do as a private equity group, which is roll up.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of businesses that have been successful in growing, I mean, they're driven by mission. They're driven by culture. They're driven out of the stories of their founders or the owning family, whatever that might look like. When it transitions to private equity, I mean, on private equity's scorecard, what types of things are they thinking about in terms of creating value? Does it continue to have that powerful mission? Does it continue to focus on culture, or does it really gravitate more towards this is a numbers game and we have a business plan and a business model that centers around the numbers, and that's really the story that we're telling ourselves that maximizes value as far as that business plan?
For any private equity company, it's never not about the numbers, right? But I think that the gradient of that has changed over the years. Sure. It used to be just a purely numbers game, and I think that was sort of the people who,
the Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, they were the wolves of the Wall Street. Yeah, they were the people who were sort of just very capitalist-driven individuals. Now we're seeing others get involved in the market, and they have to have different positions. For example, we have a lot of insurance companies that are doing private equity-based type roll-ups, right? And they have a different ethical positioning than, say, just a pure, not even in healthcare, just doing healthcare roll-ups to make cash kind of venture. We also have other entities that, all they do all day are like dental roll-ups because they're ex-dentists. Like it's what they do. It's what they like to do. But, I'll tell you, I rarely hear things like community and sort of the ethics towards our employees, or those are not discussions we see or sort of have with those types of clients.
Sure. So, I mean, if a seller is thinking about legacy, for example, or they're thinking about continued community impact, and they think about how those fit on their scorecard, relative to sales price or other things like that, I think that's just something for them to be mindful of when they go into that conversation with private equity, is that those things might not be that important to their buyer. Or they might have to find a particularly unique type of, or, fairly rare type of private equity firm that is looking for maybe that longer term investment, that patient capital approach that's more open to, how do we become a part of a community and really build long-term value as opposed to kind of that short-term flip kind of thing.
Yeah, a previous guest we had on this podcast, he talked about that. He had was courting 3 different private equity groups, and he actually didn't go to the highest bidder. He actually went to the one that was going to create that continuity for his people in there, and the team was going to stay in place. And so, I think it just goes, if you're going to go the private equity route, you got to know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
Kind of on the private equity side of it, what's the difference in deal terms when it comes to, say, we'll use dentist since we're going that route. I'm a dental group that's trying to sell to a private equity versus the mom and pop dentist down the street or in the community next door. Like, what's kind of the difference between the deals of those?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the frequency at which the private equity team does deals is so high that their both familiarity with almost all portions of the purchase agreement and the process is pretty astounding. Meaning, if you're going to push back on, subparagraph 3.23 line 2, they've thought about that for 3 years, right? If you go to a mom and pop, it's likely you're going to go to, a Sam Foreman. They're going to get a purchase agreement. They're going to have read it once. They're going to be likely not very tied to those terms, and also not understand half of them, right? And so it really, the terms that you get is a density thing as well. I mean, private equity doesn't really do many deals, even small deals, under 40, 45 pages for a transaction agreement. Conversely, I've seen mom and pops do deals at 5 or 6 pages. Not advisable, but
Yeah. It's a handshake. Yeah.
Something slightly heavier than a handshake.
Yeah. My red flag always goes up when somebody says, this is short. It's going to be simple. I'm like, oh no. Well, we're going to need to talk about this one. But what dollar size or what EBITDA size do you see private equity start to get interested in deals? Is there kind of a rule of thumb? Does it just completely vary by industries? What does that start to look like for people to know, like, hey, I've got a business that's big enough to be interesting?
It depends on the private equity group, because some private equity groups have tons of cash, and they realize that instead of doing 100 deals, they'd rather do 10. Right. So, but there are other private equity groups that are, I've seen people build as low as about $250,000, per business. Have a client who he's actually not private equity, but.
And is that on EBITDA or is that on like enterprise value? The $250,000
EBITDA.
Okay. Yep.
So I have a client who is in the Houston area and just like decided one day, like he looked at his contemporaries and saw that they were 65, 70 years old in the HVAC industry. And they were just waking up one day and just throwing their business in the trash and being like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And so, he had found that he developed in conjunction with me this strategy where he goes out and basically just buys these HVAC rollups, and they're $250,000, $300,000, $500,000 a pop for what is, a $6-7 million book of business. And so he's found, there are different sizes, I guess, of people who roll things up, and it can get pretty small, and you can still find a lot of success at that level too.
Yeah. A lot of that's happening in the franchise space right now. Private equity is getting involved on the franchisee side of the equation. And so they're starting to buy up a lot of small mom and pop franchises that are across the country. They're small EBITDAs, but add up over time. It's a playbook, and you're just adding more and more to that playbook that you already know how to do and operate.
You know what their thought is? Do you think they think they can operate them better, or they just think they're just margin like grabbing? It's
economies of scale. Is when you're able to build out the operations, you can have a regional manager instead of having managers at each location. You're able to, it's just, you're spreading the money out in a lot of different places. You can centralize a lot of efforts and everything. And so, in that space though, they need to get to probably, I'm thinking Orange Theories, because that's where my mind's at right now. They need to get to about 30, 40, 50 locations to actually start making sense that they're going to make some really good money on it. But they got to go find people like myself that maybe 2, 3, 4 unit operators to gobble them up, but they know how to make the deal. They can go like this with them because they know what they want. They know what they sell for and they can buy for.
Well, that's it. It's like, when I go into a deal with one of our private equity teams, like before we ever come to any deals, we prep all the deal paperwork, which means all of our purchase agreements, all of the downstream agreements, all of the loan agreements, everything is fully prepped. Everything with the bank is fully prepped. So when when we work sort of a private equity deal, we actually work it at the very, very front. We draft all the purchase agreement, and we get the private equity team comfortable with all of the terms on those deals, so that when they want to go out into the market and buy something, the only thing that slows them down is close terms. Are there regulatory requirements to close the deal that may slow us down? Do we have to provide notices to any third parties? If none of that happens, just from like a very logistical perspective, if it's a $1 to $5 million deal, a big law firm with that set of documents can close a deal in 14 days.
Yeah. So like that's from the buyer standpoint. From a seller standpoint, how do you prepare for that? If you're, say you are a small mom and pop that's going to sell for, $2.5 million, for an example, you're going with the private equity who's going to come with this 60 pages, all these different documents. How do you prepare to go into those conversations with a large group like that?
Yeah, you call Sam Foreman 2 to 3 years in advance. Like that's honestly the answer.
Thank you,
I'm not sort of over promoting him like that.
No, Sam's my attorney, and exactly.
Yeah. The answer is if you have an intention to exit, and you want to exit at the largest margins, which is private equity, then you have to be prepared for that exit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you relegate yourself to a risk, and that is private equity doesn't like to take uncertain risk. They don't like to make bad decisions because everyone in private equity is beholden to somebody else. I mean, somebody can get spanked no matter where they are in that line of hierarchy. And so everyone has to make a good decision, right? Well, to get to that, good decision, it takes a lot more from private equity to see deeper into your business. Meaning that like the diligence they do and the reports that they have to make up the stream have to be reliable, they have to be correct, and they have to appropriately analyze the value of the business. So to do that and to be able to move at the speed at which private equity moves, you have to be prepared. You can't just go into it where they just walk up to you one day, because I guarantee you if they walk up to you one day and say, we'll give you $2.5 million for your business and you're not prepared, when you're done with that transaction, that 2.5 is going to be 1.5 to 2 because they're going to look at all of your risks that you've not already addressed.
Yeah.
They're going to look at all of the problems and they're going to say, I'm not going to buy this at 2.5. I may buy it at 1.5, but I'm not going to pay 2.5 for that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so you lose a lot of value.
Yeah. I mean, when I talk to folks about just kind of the basics of M&A is it's an exchange of value. And if you're on the sell side, the purchase price that you can command is ultimately about the amount of value you can transition to the other side of the table successfully. And part of that is the risk that goes along with it. And so if you haven't cleaned up your business, cleaned up your books, gotten everything ready to where you have maximum value ready to actually transition to the other side of the table based on the value your buyer wants to receive, then you're going to lose out on that in terms of the value you can command. And it's something where if you know that you want to have that particular kind of exit, you really have to be planning a couple of years in advance to really maximize your value. And you can go ask questions of the market of like, hey, what are the multiples like? What are the terms like? What do they really want to see, so that you can then take that information and use it to grow your business the right way so that you can maximize value in an exit. I mean, we were just talking to somebody on a prior episode about how they had cleaned up their books. They had done all of that hard work to understand what was the value that their private equity buyers were likely to really value and prioritize. And it made a huge difference, like probably tens of millions of dollars of difference in their sales price, because they were really intentional with understanding what their buyer valued, what they wanted, and then how to prepare themselves to do it. A question I'm curious for your take on is, for folks that are thinking about maximizing value, and I already know the answer to this question, but I want to ask it because you will have a better answer than I will ever have. When you're looking as a seller at how to maximize value in a sale to a private equity buyer, are the multiples the same regardless of size?
No.
Okay.
No, not even close. I mean, that's.
Can you give us some examples of how, how the multiple might change, for example, relative to the size of the business or the size of the EBITDA?
Yeah. So on the low end of the market, where we see deals, $1 million to $5 million, our overall EBITDA multiple rarely exceeds 5 or 6. I mean, we just don't see numbers get that high up into a 9, 10, 12x multiple, right? As you go up that scale, you'll see that you can call it desperation or even just availability of goods and businesses in the market. There are other private equity companies who will offer a higher multiple for you as well. And so like, with your friend, honestly, if you're talking to a private equity company, you should be talking to 2 private equity companies. Like you should be figuring out, what is the post-transaction deal, not the pre-transaction deal, but what's the post-transaction deal, right?
Yeah.
And so the deal value though can change, or the multiple can change, vastly. I have a client of mine, their competitor just raised $250 million, promising up to a 22x multiple.
What business and how quickly can I get started?
Yeah, no doubt.
Infusion services.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Yeah.
A question I have for you, because you just hit on something I think is really important. Jacob, back to your scenario of you sometimes have a local business that's getting acquired by a local buyer. You know, maybe they're in the community over, maybe they're in the same community, and those deals are usually fairly straightforward. They're fairly simple for a lot of folks relative to a PE deal, for example, and they're usually done largely at closing, with the exception of maybe some transition services that happen, some survival of certain provisions. But when you've got a PE deal, for example, what you just described, Matt, is you've got the actual the sale itself, but then you've got the post transaction deal. Tell us a little bit more about the post transaction deal and why that's important to PE buyers, and just kind of what it all usually entails.
Yeah, it goes back to that original sentiment we kind of discussed, which is they don't know what they're doing. I mean, I think private equity tell you they don't know what they're doing, right? And so unlike a deal where one HVAC company purchases another HVAC company, they can service their book. They don't even need their employees. They just need their book of business and their phone number, right? It's not like that in every space, right?
Right.
And so, whether you need the employees or not, I think is largely dependent on, where the private equity company is in their lifespan and how big they've grown or what resources they might have. But
are you an anchor? Are you a tag along?
That's right.
How important are your people? How important is that function?
That's right. And I honestly, they'll sometimes find tag-alongs that perform better than their anchors, and they'll replace those executives.
Yeah.
So, but I'll say that, what we've noticed in the last 2 years is, particularly in healthcare, is a strong recognition by private equity that they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And it really, my wife and I operate a behavioral health practice. So and with a desire to sort of exit to private equity. So we fear this as well, but it is that private equity really won't exit anymore without your leadership team.
Jake and Sam here.
Thank you for joining us. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and especially leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes. It really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, 1 star, it's on Sam.
Yeah, it's definitely on me. Yeah. So if you're somebody who's thinking about possibly selling to private equity, you really need to be thinking about that several years in advance, educating yourself about what your buyer might want. I mean, what we tell a lot of folks on the sell side is happy buyer, happy wire, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to have that exit that feels successful to you, you need to figure out how to create as much value and transfer as much value as possible to your buyer. And so if you know already in advance that a private equity buyer might be the right buyer for you, you need to take the time to understand what they want. If what they want is a management team, it may be a management team that doesn't include you as the founder and principal owner. I mean, it might be one where they want, the subject matter experts, but they don't want to fight with the loyalty game with, the person that founded it. I mean, we talked to somebody who went through this process themselves, that the buyer didn't want, was happy to have them transition out day one because they didn't want the internal confusion of, well, hey, do I have to go ask so-and-so for permission on this still? They don't want to have that loyalty battle. But, how long does it take, somebody to build a transferable executive team, Matt?
Honestly, it takes a while because, we've talked about this even for our business. And it's like, if I think about it even in a longer time frame than you do, which is if you want to exit and you don't desire to develop an executive team that can remain behind, your exit is not a 3-year exit. It's probably a 5 to 6 year exit, meaning that you've got to sell in 3 years, but then you've got 2 to 3 years that you have to remain behind and service the company.
Yeah.
Right. And so you either have the choice to do the work now or do the work after the deal. Right. And I'll tell you that, sitting around after having multiple $1 million in your pocket, having a private equity company tell you what to do, for 2-3 years. It's not a lot of fun. None of our clients like it. I guess I'd put it that way.
You just made a business owner an employee is what you did.
That's right.
Yeah.
You just made someone who had all the freedom in the world, none of that. Yeah. And so you have to anticipate and think about that from the question you asked earlier, which is, what do you do in advance?
Yeah.
You know, if
Yeah.
you do nothing in advance, you don't sell. Like
Right.
what you do is you sell, and then you basically have to work there for 3 more years. So you don't get to go play with your money. You don't get to go live life. You're beholden to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is one of those things where if you think in advance, you can exit when you want to exit. But if you don't, then you're likely going to be stuck at some level, kind of teaching and coaching the group that's purchased your company.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really important because a lot of folks, they time their exit around when they want to stop working.
That's right.
And I think what you just said is so powerful is like, if you plan, you can understand what that timeline looks like and you can actually have some influence over it, not control, but influence. But I mean, a lot of that is people that got to get, I think the people that I see being successful at this process are proactive with figuring out, getting information, learning about things and figuring out like, what is that process going to look like so that they can actually map it out and max it out. That's really good. That's going to go on a mug someday. Map it out and max it out. I'm just here for the taglines, folks.
Samisms.
Yeah, Samisms. Yep. But I think that's really important for folks to really understand how much time they might need, because to your point, sometimes it is a 5 to 6 year time horizon, and people need to know, like, if you choose that path and that's the path you've optimized around, what that commitment might be. That it's not just hey, I got to get ready and then I got to have a sale in this time period and then I might also have to stick around. They need to know what that exchange is that they're going to have to make to maximize value, or they just need to understand that their priorities are lined up differently and pick a different path. Well,
and I would also just tell you that, when we have a client come to us as a buyer and the other side says, I'm retiring, I want out, I want to sell my business, their inclination and thought process is, I'm not paying full value for that business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you think you're going to exit at retirement and you don't have an executive plan set up,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be leveraged.
Yeah.
There's just no question about it, because you want an outcome from that situation that the only way you can get it is by basically telling them to pay whatever number you'll deal with. And so I just think you're in a bad spot if you are trying to sell on your retirement day.
Right. Well, I think it kind of goes back to that fundamental principle that, the value that you can sell your business for is the value that you can transfer and exchange to the other party in the deal. And if you don't have maximum value to transition because you're going to retire and you're going to wind it down, and you're not going to be able to transition that value on the other side of the, of the closing date, that's going to limit the value that you can transition.
That's right.
And that's going to reduce your purchase price. I mean, it's just part of how that works.
Yeah. So in the eyes of a private equity group, what's success look like in a deal? Like if they said, that was good, everything went according to plan, like what does that look like? What is a good deal process? I would say both on private equity side, but also on the seller side too, as well.
I'd say it depends on their objective.
Mm-hmm.
They all have a certain goal going into each deal. And if their goals on the deal are largely met, nothing else really matters.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can get through a really dirty kind of slogging, too much diligence or too many problems or too many risks. We can get through all of that and everyone is largely happy with the deal as long as the goals were met.
Mm-hmm.
If the goals got altered during the process, that's when they get upset. So for example, they're like, look, I'm going to buy a company, they're doing $2 million a year. That adds in certain ways that accomplishes our goals. And then they get to it and the due diligence is, $1.2 million a year. They don't have executive team that's coming on, employees are in shatters or non-quality. Then it's just a complete other deal. It decreases the quality of the deal, decreases the purchase price, makes the exit a lot less, in value for the seller. So, private equity just wants to see clean transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get that, that's when they're most satisfied. The other thing I would say is understand the temperament of counsel involved on the other side, because some counsel within private equity, and frankly, I've been instructed and acted this way myself, can be deeply inflexible when it comes to negotiation. And you can over negotiate yourself out of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's such powerful advice for a lot of folks to hear because, as you explained earlier, when the private equity process starts, it is not a singular transaction.
That's right.
Like they are looking at a strategy where they create financial return by acquiring and leveraging a particular scale of related businesses. And part of what makes that business model work is the efficiency of the actual acquisitive process.
That's right.
And so they can't have lots of variation, whereas a strategic buyer might be highly flexible around things, or whereas a local buyer, for example, or just a financial buyer might have lots of flexibility. And so, I mean, what I would tell a lot of sellers is, think about all of these things that really matter to you. I mean, we talk to folks a lot about like what is on your personal scorecard, like what's most important to you. Know what that is, right? Because sometimes it's going to be things that trump the financial return. And if maximum value from a financial perspective is on selling to private equity, but you have other things that you value more or that in combination are more important to you, you need to know those up front so that you can put that process, those years of golden work that you have to put in to maximizing the values that matter most to you, that you can put that to work the hardest for you. And do it in a way that's reasonably likely to get you the outcomes that you want. You don't end up with big surprises with dollar signs on it at the end of, oh, I did all of this work for something that's not really going to make me happy at the end of the day. Because like you said, sometimes private equity is coming in to pay you a really big check because they want your phone number, they want your client list, and they're going to terminate all of your employees.
That's right.
And they're going to move their operations out of your community. And that's something that maybe you as a seller don't want. And if that's what you don't want, then don't sell to that particular private equity buyer. Find a different one or find a different kind of model altogether. But from a process standpoint, for folks that know what they want and think private equity might still be the right route, to your example of those processes, sometimes the teams are highly inflexible on terms. What we encourage everybody to do is think about those deal makers and deal breakers and know what they are going into the process. Because, and I'd be curious for your take on this, your best opportunity to get those is not in the documents, it's at the deal table. Like if you have something that you want and you want a chance at it, put those on the table at the very beginning. Like know right away, is that even a possibility? Yeah. Because if you can negotiate it there, then, I mean, people are going to honor generally what they said and you'll get it in the deal, or you'll know like, hey, this isn't the process for me. This isn't the deal partner for me. And now I didn't waste a whole bunch of time and money going 80%, 90% of the way through a process just to find out I couldn't get what I actually wanted.
That's right. And I really encourage that with private equity groups because they're a lot more fluid. We've had instances where, we were offering caps and buckets at certain percentages and it was varying internally. And I wouldn't say an attorney gave bad advice, but they relied upon our standardized cap and bucket in giving some advice and then realized that the cap and bucket was off, like that we would make a substantial multi-million-dollar loss in that advising. I think they had caught it and I think they were fine. But the point is that varying in those deal terms and then not being cognizant because they're like private equity, we just always have the same deal terms. They didn't catch on that. And so it really hurt them by just literally varying within one paragraph of the purchase agreement because they operate under that assumption. Like we don't change much, we operate standardly. And, as I had one of my, is a very, very good private equity attorney, retort back to the other side, when they basically said, look, let's just worry about those sort of terms after, we wrap up closing. And he,
let's work out the deal after the deal.
Yeah.
After the
Yeah. And as he said in a
I'm
very
not having a panic attack. I'm not having a panic attack. Yeah.
That's exactly how I feel. Yeah. As he said in a quick retort, he's like, well, as you know, like, post-transaction judgments affect pre-transaction purchase price. And I think that is a great way to just think about the deal process in general, which is everything we do now and everything you do as a business now, whether you're prepared or not prepared, all of that affects purchase price. But once that happens, the company's no longer yours, right? So you got to get to that purchase price and you have to make those correct judgments, whether they're appropriate judgments in the deal process or they're appropriate judgments before the deal process.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to talk a little bit more about the post-transaction process because I think this is something that's fairly unique to private equity that a lot of folks don't always have to deal with. That I mean, I've seen it a lot in the healthcare space, for example, where you have like rollover equity, and you have a lot of the strings that go along with that. I mean, first off, would you explain for folks what is rollover equity and how prevalent is it in private equity deals?
So rollover equity is basically equity that the seller receives in the private equity company that allows them to gain value as the private equity company itself succeeds. And the thought process there is twofold. The first is bring you into the fold, bring you into the machine and make sure that you want the machine to do just as well as the machine's doing. And then the second is to create some value for you in that the goal proposition is that let's say you go in, you have $1 million in purchase price that they're going to roll over into equity. They usually want you to retain. They want to retain you in some way. So, let's say the equity deal, like most of them these days are about 5 years. In healthcare, they will not do deals without retaining at least providers. It doesn't have to be executives, but providers are the ones who make the money in those enterprises. And so they can't retain the providers. They just won't do the deal anymore. So when they provide them rollover equity, the hope is that, you bring them in at $1, and then when they sort of that 5 years is up, they can exit if they want. But when they exit, that $1 per share, increase to $2.50 or $5 per share. So like worked with a DSO entity where everyone was
real quick. Explain DSOs. What is a DSO for folks?
A dental services organization. They're just a private equity group that rolls up dentists. So worked with a dental services organization, and they started at, I think, gave everybody the anchors like 25 cents on the dollar for sort of their interest in the company. And when I left them, they were at about $3.75 a share. So like and that was in a 3-year process, right? So like their goal is to vastly improve the value, but they want you along for the ride. If there's a conference, they want you to show up. If there's a marketing opportunity in your network, they want you to market for them, right? So they want you invested in their outcomes so that you will fight for the home team.
Right. I mean, it kind of goes back to that fundamental principle for private equity is that they are not in the business.
That's right.
They are in the business of building businesses and leveraging their understanding of economics and market building and building these really powerful systems. But they need the people that actually know the business on an operational level to actually come in and then be able to be partners in multiplying that value. And so sometimes that can be a really lucrative opportunity for folks that want to stick around. I think for sellers, they're looking at, the time horizon of preparing for one of these deals. If you've got a scenario where private equity is, hey, this is a talent play, we've got to get all of these particular people in here. You got to think about whether or not your team that you're building actually wants to go and be a part of that deal. Because I mean, we've dealt with, and sometimes it's been on DSO deals and sometimes it's been on other things where people don't want the golden handcuffs. Like their dream is not to go, the top of their personal scorecard is not spelled out in dollars. I mean, they want to be a business owner on their own, serving their community, part of that, controlling the quality of care, controlling the quality of service, whatever. Their dream is not to be part of this big behemoth, no matter how many dollars are assigned to it. And if you're building a team and that's your goal, is that kind of an exit, you need to understand well enough what your buyer is thinking about things. So you're building the team in the right way and you're screening people for, hey, is this somebody who's actually probably going to want to go along on a deal like that?
That's right.
And then one of the things that I've seen on private equity deals that I always try to, when we're on the sell side, because I've never been on a buy side on a private equity and I'm not sure that I want to. Maybe I do. If I can charge Matt Agnew rates, maybe I'll think about it.
Do you like your wife and kids?
I do like my wife and kids a lot.
You know your answer then.
Yeah. Was the suggestion then that I get my wife and kids to form a private equity group and then I work for them? Is that the...
I mean, if you can get them to do it.
But one of the things that people really have to be aware of when they're going through those deals is a lot of times the rollover equity can be subsequently rolled over again. Like it is something where there is a potentially infinite roll. Like there is not usually a baked in. You lose the ability to control your liquidity at that point. And often that's going to go along with a lot of restrictive covenants. And those restrictive covenants are going to be tied to where the business is at. And that's going to change and grow. And so if you're going on that ride, you have to really understand what the ride is that you're going on and how you're making this trade of, I want this potentially massive, enormous upside, and I'm willing to give up control over my, really the ability to time when that occurs, how that occurs, and my ability to control my own, professional deployment, at least in this particular space.
Yeah.
And for those that are thinking, well, but the FTC rule made non-competes illegal, probably not in this context. There will be a way around it.
In the ownership context, particularly.
Yeah, especially the ownership context.
And kind of flipping it back on the seller side of it. So, or like if a seller has debt on the books, how do private equity look at that? If and I'll using a dental work in there's sometimes capital expenses that are in there from equipment, those sort of things. And maybe they purchase the business from somebody else, and they have debt on the books from a loan. How does private equity look at that when they are evaluating?
So they look at it as a relationship to the purchase price and what the seller is looking to get. Meaning that, we had an instance where someone was selling their business and they had, I think the purchase price was about 2.5. They had about $2.5 million in debt. They were looking at a substantial tax implication because they sold their business as well. And the tax implication far exceeded what they would get in the purchase price and their debt. And so we went to the other side and just said, hey, look, is that your intention? Like, do you intend to sell this business at a sort of a cash loss? And the doctor in that instance was like, no, like not at all. And we were like, so do we have a deal? And they're like, no, we don't. And I think that's part of it is like, you've got to see it from the private equity sees it from the perspective of themselves first, which is, are we giving them enough cash that there's going to be, cash in their pocket and they're going to be happy with the deal. And then they see it from the other perspective, which is like, are they going to get the necessary cash to want to stay around, to like this deal, to be happy about it? Or is it just like, we're their last lifeline and, throwing them sort of a life raft? Private equity is not interested in that situation, right?
Gotcha.
Like they're really wanting to invest in things. And so, it's just about getting prepared in advance to be able to sell your business to them so that they see it's the thing with what Sam's saying. It's just not that you have value, but it's that the private equity company sees the value the way you do. Because a lot of people think their business is worth a ton of money and they valued it in certain ways to themselves. But as Sam will tell you, private equity doesn't care about a lot of the ways you value your business. If you're like, oh, it does great things for the community, they're like, yeah, it puts shoes on kids because we sell them to them, right? Like they see it completely differently.
Yeah, it's a piece of their puzzle.
That's right.
Yeah. No, that's really great. Matt, we really appreciate you joining us today. For folks that are looking at potentially preparing themselves for a private equity deal, what are some of your best pieces of advice for them to keep in mind as they sort of explore that and look for that opportunity?
Yeah, I think, if you have legal counsel, go to your lawyer and ask them for a copy of what's called their due diligence request list. If they're a deal lawyer, that's the first thing is you'll know they're a deal lawyer because they have one of those. And if they don't, find yourself a deal lawyer. Don't just use a regular lawyer. And if they don't have, a due diligence request list, you'll immediately have a clear indicator they don't do that. The reason I ask you to request that list is because that list has everything on it that a private equity company is likely to request. And if you can't look at that list and tell me where most of that stuff is, you're not prepared. So take that list and go look, where's your corporate formation document? Where's your third amendment to your LLC agreement, right? Like make sure that you have all of your tax documents in a file folder. This sort of question about, private equity wants to come and get the deal done quickly. If they come to get the deal done and you're searching for 3 months for paperwork, they're going to look for someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that old saying, time kills deals.
It does.
And in a private equity standpoint, it's much more acute than it is in a lot of other standpoints. I mean, your strategic buyer, your financial buyer, your local buyer may be much more patient than, your private equity buyer.
They got a timeline.
Yeah. But even if you're looking for a different kind of buyer, that process is still really valuable.
Yeah, it's all the same.
Because at the end of the day, you've got a transition value and you need to be able to back it up. You need to be able to justify it, and you need to be able to spot the weak points.
Yeah.
And if you're diligent in that preparation process, you've got options. And if you're not, well, there's an exit plan for you one way or another.
Yeah.
It's just whether you pick it or it picks you.
Well, and the diligence process is very dense. It's very complicated. You usually don't get all of the documents anyway. But the point of getting it done now is it will illustrate where your holes are. So if you're wanting to prevent the risk of losing capital in a deal through due diligence, you have to know where your holes are now, and you have to fix them before you get there. We see this all the time with healthcare companies. If you're missing something on that list as a healthcare company, it's likely that you're presenting at least a 6-figure, but potentially, a 9-figure risk to, the buyer. And so, not going through that list and not being prepared, knowing what you need to be able to sell your business is, I think, that's the shortest sighted thinking you can have if you're a business owner that wants to exit. Like, know where everything is, be able to produce it, and if you can't, get there.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you joining us. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Man, I really enjoyed the conversation today. I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, as business owners, we're entrusted with this opportunity to maximize the value of how we help people, how we serve our communities, how we serve our employees, how we serve our families, and being educated about what your options are and what that path might look like so you can be intentional is really, really important, whether your scorecard is based on dollars or some other kind of impact. Take the time to understand what matters most and how to get there. And have an awesome day. Thanks. Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.